On July 1st, 2017, Dr. Timothy C. Caboni began his tenure as the 10th president of Western Kentucky University. Coming up on Outlook, we sit down and talk with Dr. Caboni. Stay tuned. Outlook is next. He comes to the table with a diverse amount of experience and a true collaborative spirit. He is Dr. Timothy C. Caboni, the new president of Western Kentucky University, and we're very delighted to have him as a guest on Outlook today. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me, Barbara.
You know, before we get started, I don't want to jinx this again, but a lot of people, so the name is Caboni, there's no R.
No R, no car in Caboni.
There's no car in Caboni. I love it. Remember that. Well, you know, when I just said that and said your name and said the 10th president of Western Kentucky University, how's that sound?
It's remarkable. This has been a journey that actually began 20 some odd years ago here at WKU as a graduate student. I left here and didn't know that higher education was going to be my calling, but wound up falling into a career that has been terrific, and to be able to come home and lead my alma mater is humbling, but also a remarkable opportunity.
Well, let's talk. You know, a lot of people want to know about you. They see the bow tie, the great smile, and the energy. It's almost palpable in your space. But you're coming on the heels of 2 decades of leadership, consistent leadership, Dr. Gary Ransdell, a lot of transformation, a lot of growth. So you've got that. How do you find that balance where you want to respect the previous administration and yet you have to forge the Caboni years? So how do you strike that balance?
Well, President Ransdell has done remarkable things for this university, and it benefits not just everyone here today, but everyone who comes in the future, including me. And so I'm really thankful for the work that he's done. The physical plant is in remarkable shape. The national reputation is on the rise and has been for many years. My job is to continue that momentum and do it in a way that maybe shifts our focus a little bit to people and programs from the physical plant, but also talks about what an applied research university does for our community, for the Commonwealth, for our nation, and really try to hone in on that message for the institution, for my presidency. The other is that WKU has only had 10 presidents now in its history, and so there is the expectation of longevity. 20 years nowadays is a long time for a president to serve, the average tenured being about 7 years. But here there's an expectation that you do your decade or 2 of service, and so I'm looking forward to that. Following someone who has the reputation of President Ransdell obviously could be daunting, but I'm confident. I think there's a lot of work ahead.
There you go. Well, the sky's the limit, right, with that one. Now, let's talk a little bit about your diverse experience, because you got your master's degree at WKU, you got your bachelor's degree at LSU, and then you landed in Nashville at Vanderbilt and finished up that PhD. So give our audience a sense of where you come from.
Well, it's interesting, and I actually use almost each part of my education every single day. My undergraduate training is in speech and rhetoric, so I spend a great deal of time thinking about how speeches are constructed, how organizations communicate. I moved from a theoretical perspective, came to WKU and had a very applied experiences, which is one of the hallmarks of a WKU education, that it takes theory and puts it into practice. Mm-hmm. And so spent a year and a half here pursuing a master's degree, thinking about all these theories around communication, but how they work for real world organizations. Left here in 1994 and was not quite sure what I was going to do. I loved universities and have wound up spending every day since I graduated high school on a university campus. So it's not a bad
surprise.
It's not a bad way to spend one's life. It keeps you young. I fell into prospect research, which it's the dark arts of fundraising, essentially. It's how do you identify people who have capacity and what are their interests and how might we develop relationships with them. The only downside was that job required being behind a computer 8 hours a day, and I was either too fidgety or too energetic to do that. I moved very quickly into an alumni relations role where I spent time with a brand new president at Loyola University in New Orleans, traveling the country and helping to introduce him to alumni.
Well, no, that's an interesting little snippet right there, isn't it? So you got to be at that side with the new president. Now here you are. What did you learn from that?
It was remarkable. We had something called road rules, meaning that when we're traveling together, we could talk about whatever challenges he was facing in the car, and they stayed in the car.
Stayed in the car.
And I got a window into what it looked like to be a young president, a new president. As a real youngster, I was 25 years old. And so that really piqued my interest in, as a 25-year-old, I thought, oh, well, maybe I want to be university president as my next job, not knowing that there was a bit of a path that one has to follow to get to that place. But it was a remarkable experience coming to understand what a president really does, and what the fun parts are, which for me at least has always been meeting people and articulating where we're going as a university, but also some of the challenges as well, dealing with budget issues, thinking about calling the parents of students who may have been lost by the institution. And there are some really difficult things that a president has to do as well. Getting to see that firsthand and still be committed to at least that some sort of path there as a career. After that experience, I became Chief Development Officer for the School of Business. We finished up a capital campaign, and at that point it was time for me to assess what came next. And one of my mentors, Dave Jones, was at Vanderbilt and said, Tim, you need to come get your PhD in institutional advancement, which is the moniker that we give to fundraising, public relations, and alumni relations. And so I decamped from New Orleans and moved back to the Tennessee Valley. And Nashville back then was obviously much smaller and a little less energetic than it is today, but it was a terrific experience. Was there for 4 years as a graduate student, and Dave passed away really soon after I got there. And the program that I had been recruited to was a higher education program, not necessarily a fundraising program. Dave was wonderful at compelling or convincing people to do things. And so at the end of my time there, I'd finished my dissertation. I'd done it on fundraising and fundraising behaviors. And they said, Tim, you seem to care a great deal about this program. We don't really know what it is. Do you want it?
Would you like to create it?
And so during the intervening time, that had dwindled, and so I joined the faculty. I remember very clearly going one day from being a student to the next Monday having a faculty office and being in the hallway with the folks who had the previous week been my professors, all of a sudden were my colleagues. And I've had that experience.
You're I'm visualizing this rocket, the Caboni trajectory. You just seem to have things like that happen for you.
I've been incredibly fortunate. There are, at most a few hundred of these institutions in the nation that are like WKU or a research university or a significant applied institution. And I'm blessed to be able to have this experience. So I stayed at Vanderbilt and rebuilt that program. The dean noticed something in me, and I did summer programs, or built something called Peabody Professional Institutes, and then they gave me recruitment, admissions, communications, financial aid, and I was a deanlet. I thought I was going to go on to have a career in academia and become a dean at a university, and well, I didn't. The chancellor at Kansas asked me to join her there to do public affairs, which is not the typical career trajectory for an aspiring university president, but it's all worked out. So.
It's all worked out. Here you are. We've got to keep moving because we don't have a lot of time. But you talked about the unique experience you had as a 25-year-old with a new president, and funding 25 years ago was still a big issue. Funding is always the issue. So, as we move forward in the Caboni years, how do you plan to address some of those funding issues?
Well, what we know is the national conversation has been one about who pays for higher education. And we've seen across the nation a shift from higher education and university education being a public good to a private good. There is the expectation that individuals will cover ever more of a percentage of what it costs to get a degree. So that creates real affordability pressures on higher education. What we have to do is think very carefully about how the revenue streams match up with what people are able to afford. So the multiple-legged stool of university funding is made up primarily of tuition, state revenue, philanthropy, and then other fees. And so what we have to do is figure out what's the best mix for the university. If we're going to do additional fundraising, which we will do, how do we target it to help not just attract the best and brightest students to WKU, how do we also use it to ensure the neediest of Kentuckians who want to come have a WKU experience can afford that? And so that's how we're going to spend our time. The other, and I've had terrific experience with this at Kansas, is thinking about public-private partnerships. If there will not be additional state investment, given the challenges that the budget faces, then how do we think creatively about other folks in the community who want to accomplish things that are mutually beneficial, and how do we partner to do that? And so we're going to explore as many of those as possible to continue to grow enrollment, to ensure more people graduate, and to help grow the national stature of WKU going forward.
Now, performance-based funding is something that you're going to be hearing a lot about as it relates to higher education. I want to talk about that, but we're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we can go into that. Stay tuned. Outlook continues with Dr. Tim Caboni. Stay tuned. Outlook continues. I'm Barbara Deeb. We continue our conversation with the new president of Western Kentucky University, Dr. Timothy C. Caboni. Welcome.
Thank you.
Before the break, we were talking about funding, and of course, what an issue that always is. Performance-based funding is something that's going to happen in the state of Kentucky. Help our audience understand what that means.
Well, it essentially means that going forward, some portion of the university's budget will be based upon a set of outcome metrics. And these are things that one might think a university would pay attention to, like number of graduates, number of degrees in a STEM field, number of students who move from first year to second year. And from my perspective, universities being held accountable for the work they should be doing is okay, and tying funding to it, I think will help to focus our attention on the things that we should be paying attention to: student success, student graduation, producing an educated workforce for our region.
Comprehensive strategic planning. Boom. First day on the job, you talk about that. And it probably makes good sense. What's our plan? So you're in the process of formulating that.
We have been thinking for about 5 months with a transition group. What are the challenges that we face? How do we move forward? But I've said on multiple occasions, my vision for the institution, while it may be important to me, is not the be-all, end-all. What we have to do is have a conversation as a community, a university community, the Bowling Green community, Warren County and the region, about what do we want WKU to be and how do we get there. And one of the hallmarks, I think, of my entire career has been listening and engaging and including. And I think I'm hopeful that the process that we're going to put together will allow for the whole community, our students, our faculty, our staff, donors, friends, alumni, to talk about what they see as and what are their hopes and dreams for the university, and how do we empower that as an institution. I think it's the fun work. The implementation of it gets a little bit hairy on occasion, but the visioning process, the thinking about where we're headed, don't think of all the negatives, let's think of all the positives and possibilities is a wonderful process for an institution.
So this spirit of collaboration, this each president has his or her legacy. So this is your first week in the job. I'm going to go ahead and ask you this. Let's say we go into the future, we're looking back 10 years, and we say, Tim Caboni, his legacy was. Can you say that? Do you know what you'd like that to be?
Well, I think I want people to remember me as a partner on campus with faculty and staff. I'm hopeful the community would see me and the university as a tremendous partner going forward. We have been. We're going to continue that work. But at the end of the day, what we want to do is elevate the entire community, the institutional community, the community of Bowling Green, the Warren County, the entire region, all of our regional campuses. We want to work to make those communities better. At the same time, we want to transform the lives of our students and help sure that the experiences they have are life-altering and put them on a path for career success, not just making a good living, but making a good life for themselves. And then the last is, what are the innovations we want to create, both in terms of the knowledge creation mission, but also thinking differently about how higher education is delivered. Are there ways for us to be even more distinctive nationally? At the end of the day, if we can accomplish those things together, I've been a success, and more importantly, the university will be incredibly successful.
Well, student focused. You know, it seems it's not rocket science, right? It's about the students, and yet it seems like you're talking about coming back to that, where it's really student focused.
One of the things that higher education tends to do is have multiple competing priorities, multiple competing interests, and the job of a good president is really to help focus all of that energy on a select number of places where an institution can be successful. And for us, given what the state has asked of us, which is more and better graduates, we need to think about from beginning to end, from hi, how are you doing, we're WKU, to congratulations as you walk out the door, and then a lifetime of learning afterward. How do we make sure that we're building the workforce, that we're helping to increase the human capital that we have in the region, and how are we changing lives? I think that's what we do every single day, and that's incredibly rewarding to a president, to a faculty member, to a staff member, and to anyone else who's involved in the enterprise.
Absolutely, the enterprise, I like that. The leading American university with international reach, Gary Ransdell, made that his mantra for nearly 2 decades. And I think he leaves with a good feeling, knowing that he has done what he could to internationalize the university.
Absolutely.
Will we maintain that course?
So that is an incredibly important part of the fabric of this university. Students from away who come here and think about the experiences that they have while here, not only are good for those people from other nations, but also great for our students here in Kentucky and around the country. To be sitting next to someone from Saudi Arabia and to see the world through their eyes is a great experience for everyone. And so I'm very hopeful that that will continue and continue to grow. Anthropologists think of it this way, that we want to make the strange familiar and the familiar strange. And so how can we help young people who see the world in a particular way see it through another person's eyes, and how does that help grow them? That's for international students and for domestic students too.
How do we remain relevant? The world is changing, it's evolving, digital learning is exploding. You know, do you think bricks and mortar are always going to be there?
There is something about the residential college experience that is important, and it is more than just the education that one receives in the 18 hours in the classroom. It's about what happens in the other 150, 60 or so hours outside of the classroom. For me, personally, that was a transformative experience, and we know that institutions that do residential education with people who live in dorms and residence halls with their peers, it's a different experience than the online education experience. I'm not saying it's better or worse, it's just different and it's important. And for me, I think always will remain relevant. At the same time, we have to think about how might we use technology to broaden our reach, to drive down costs, to make available to lifelong learners education on demand. It's an exciting time. Not getting stuck in the 3-hour sage on a stage lecture. How do we take advantage of the technology available to us?
But by the same token, we live in a very rural terrain and environment, and I found a statistic the other day, I can't recall the number, but a lot of people don't even have access to the internet. And yet here we're talking about we're going to bring them education this way. So there's a disconnect somewhere there.
There is, and I think that if you talk about gaps, one of the gaps that we have in the nation is gaps in access to high-speed internet, and I think that's important, particularly for a state like Kentucky, to think about how do we address that. I think I lived in rural Tennessee when I was at Vanderbilt, and I didn't have at home anywhere near the kind of access that I had on campus, and that was a barrier. And I think it's a barrier to young people as well. We have to address that as a state, in addition to thinking about the implications for education. I do want to return to the opportunities ahead. I also think that when you think about education, that over a lifetime, individuals now have 5, 6, 7 careers. And it's important not just to provide training in a particular discipline or profession, but really how do we help folks get the habits of mind, the critical thinking skills for them to be successful for a lifetime. If you ask someone who in 1972 got a degree in programming in Fortran, I'm not sure how useful those specific Fortran programming skills are today. But if you got a degree in English, I guarantee you the communication skills, the writing skills, the critical thinking skills do last. And so I think we can't lose sight of as important as technical fields are, so are the critical thinkings and the liberal thinking skills and the liberal arts, and we have to be mindful of that.
Very well put. So, bow ties, you like to wear bow ties. And so, you know, there used to be a commercial 100 years ago, you got to have a gimmick. And so, it's more about branding, isn't it?
Well, I like them for several reasons. Number one, there's less material to hang me with, so it's safer, particularly on a campus when people could grab you walking by. But for me, it also is pretty friendly. You mentioned smiling, and it just really is a conversation starter. And in my previous roles and in my role as university president, being able to engage and have a conversation right off the bat is important. And so it's been a hallmark of my career, and I think it makes me more approachable perhaps than just looking like everybody else.
Well, and that's important on a university campus. You also like to cook, huh?
Oh, yes. I
so
love
is that
to cook.
you grew up in Louisiana?
I grew up in New Orleans,
Yeah.
and so you know, men cooked, and it was a great place to grow up. My grandparents, I remember coming over on Saturday to do prep work, so get your mise en place all ready, all chopping and seasonings, so that you could cook on Saturday afternoon and Sunday. And food is an important part of my life, of the culture there, and I love to cook, but even more importantly, I'd love to eat.
So it works. And you have a young wife who is your newlyweds pretty much, right?
We
About
are.
3 years in.
3 years married.
And so we're very excited to have her because she brings a wealth of experience as well to the Hill.
She is much more likable than I am, I think, number one.
I don't know about that one.
But she is a remarkable fundraiser. She was team leader and chief development officer for the School of Business at Kansas, and helped build an $80 million new School of Business building, which is a need here at WKU as well, and did it solely through private philanthropy along with the school leadership. She is terrific at developing relationships, asking for money successfully, and generating voluntary support. And so she's going to be a terrific asset, not just as First Lady, but as a professional development officer here at the university.
Casey, her name is Casey.
Casey.
Casey Caboni, got it. We are out of time, but I will hope you will come and share this chair whenever you're in the area. Come visit with us.
I would love to. Thank you so much
Thank
for the time.
you so much. We've been talking with the new president of Western Kentucky University, and in his first week, 2017, Dr. Timothy C. Caboni. I'm Barbara Deeb. Thanks for joining us.